The most likely time for women to commit suicide is between the ages of 45 and 55. We see a quadrupling of depression rates through the perimenopause transition. 80% of us will have significant brain fog. 85% of us will have hot flashes. Our aging is accelerating. So a woman in premenopause will have 8% of her fat will be visceral fat, okay? She goes through the menopause transition, changes nothing about her diet and exercise. That goes up to 23%. I've had multiple clinicians say, not much you can do for her. Women tend to complain. It's just her time of life.
Whoa! Let's say you're finding yourself putting on belly fat, but you haven't changed anything. Your diet's the same, your exercise is the same. So you go to the doctor and then they just dismiss you by telling you to just put down the fork. Or let's say you have crazy tummy cramps, mood swings, night sweats, brain fog. And so you go to the doctor and they label you a WW and tell you it's just age and they dismiss you. So what on earth is a WW that the doctors label us with? And how do we know if it's our hormones and the doctor is just gaslighting us?
So WW is an embarrassing story for me to tell. When I was in my training program, you know, I'm super nervous. I'm an intern. I've got my little long white coat on for the first time, and we go to the gynecology clinic to start seeing patients. And gynecology clinic is everything that's not pregnancy. So some pediatrics, some, you know, ruling out cancer. And then you get this kind of mishmash of women coming in with multiple complaints. So I pick up my chart. I'm all excited to go see this woman, and it opens it up and she has brain fog, gaining weight, she's not sleeping, her libido's decreased, maybe she's having headaches, you know, some laundry list of very kind of vague symptoms. And so we have to check out, you know, our upper levels are in charge of us. And so I go to the man who is my, you know, chief resident, and I say, okay, I have this patient. And he goes, oh, you got a WW. And I said, okay, what's that? And he said, it's a whiny woman. And I said, oh. And he said, not much you can do for her. It's just her time of life. Women tend to complain at this time of life. You know, I'm an intern, just happy to be there. And like, this is my chief telling me this is reality. And I'm like, okay. So I go in that room with this poor woman who I now know is probably in perimenopause or early menopause and didn't know how to put a name to, and we weren't teaching our medical professionals how to recognize this constellation of symptoms. And I've had multiple clinicians say, yeah, this was something we noticed in the female clinics, that we were taught that women tend to somaticize their symptoms, and they tend to have psychological reasons for these biological issues, which I think is ridiculous now.
Dude, that's so crazy to me, but thank you for being so honest and sharing that, because I think that really lays the groundwork to what we're going to talk about today, is that anyone listening right now, you're not crazy. It isn't normal. But we do sometimes, ourselves included, gaslight ourselves.
Yeah.
So talk to me about doctors gaslighting us and then us gaslighting ourselves so we can start to unwire all of this.
And I, don't want to put this on the shoulders that all doctors are bad and, they hate women and all this. This is a systemic problem. This is thousands of years of medical training coming down from the ancient Greeks and Romans who coined the term hysteria, which was a wandering uterus, that anything that was different than what a man was going through was automatically kind of attributed to this vague notion of there's something maybe psychological going on with her, because they didn't know how to diagnose it. And, menopause wasn't even recognized until just decades ago. And that the menopause was actually caused by ovarian failure, ovarian dysfunction, really has only been seriously studied in the last maybe 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Okay, so where can we start to look at these symptoms? In fact, you listed a few. Could you list a few more of the symptoms? So you said like brain fog, because anyone listening, like I want to shake people freaking awake today, girl, is that if you're listening right now and you have any of these symptoms or something else, it could be a sign that you're in perimenopause.
So one of the most profound things that I learned in this whole menopause journey, because I kind of like stopped learning about anything about menopause, and I didn't learn anything clinically significant in my OB-GYN residency. I maybe had 6 hours of lecture in a 4-year curriculum. What I learned was important, but there was a huge gap in menopause education. Then I graduate and I go out into the real world. And of course I had menopausal patients, but when I was younger, most of my patients were my age and we were having babies together and going through the same phases of life together. Then we all start going through perimenopause together. And that's when my red flags started flying. Like, wait a minute, is this the best we can do for these women, for these patients? But what I've learned in the last 5 years is that there are estrogen receptors in every organ system of our body. And when those levels become chaotic in perimenopause and then decline to less than 1% of our reproductive year levels of estradiol, there are profound effects in multiple organ systems. So let's go head to toe.
Yeah,
okay?
love that.
So the brain, the top two there, cognition, so brain fog. 80% of us will have significant brain fog. Lisa Mosconi's work with the menopause brain, she did PET scans and CAT scans and looked at brain function through the menopause transition and saw basically a complete rewiring of the brain. So most women will have significant brain fog, some to the point where 1 in 5 will quit their jobs in perimenopause and menopause because they don't feel like they can keep up with the mental load that they had no problem with before. And so that does tend to get better over time, but you've got about a 10, 15-year window where you can't function the way that you used to. So a lot of women are stepping back from the workforce, which is really their time to lean in, that they have all this experience. They're, if they had children, they're off away. Now they can really focus, and they can't because their brain's not working. Mental health, this is huge. This is where the most likely time for a woman to commit suicide is between the ages of 45 and 55. Okay, we see a quadrupling of depression rates through the perimenopause transition. Okay, we see, we know that women who are on hormone therapy in perimenopause have a much lower incidence of worsening depression or new onset depression. So this is a huge impact in women's lives.
The weight of the fact that many women may turn to suicide because of our hormones and we're not taking this seriously. I just want to pause there to be this is why we actually...
Huge impact.
Yeah, this isn't just women are quote unquote going crazy, right? Where it's they're just being silly, they're forgetful. It's no, this is actually serious.
This is huge.
And then when you say brain fog, I just want to maybe just highlight a couple of things of what brain fog could look like to people. So would you consider, for me, and I'm always very honest, the reason why I'm so passionate about this interview and you and your book is really that I've started to feel the symptoms. I'm 44 and doing these interviews, again, just being very transparent. I'll be on set interviewing somebody and words fall out of my head.
That's a huge thing. You lose your words, you lose your train of thought, your ability to do complex calculations for some women who are in the STEM world, and they just can't, and it's these were things that were effortless before for you.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden you just can't, and you're stumbling. So, it could be, word recall, they can't do the crossword puzzles, they can't read and retain like they used to, they can't enjoy a novel like they used to. Dr. Blooming, Avram Blooming, who wrote Estrogen Matters, he tells a story about his wife who was a breast cancer treatment, and she was on some of the estrogen blockers. So not only was she menopausal, but they were removing all the estrogen from her body as a form of cancer treatment. She was a voracious reader and could not follow along with the stories. And this was the thing that gave her the most joy. And watching her suffer and lose that part of her life was almost unbearable for him. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about.
Yeah, and I love that you said, it was a heartbreaking story, but I love that you said that, because when you think about, it's not just the brain fog in isolation, it's you lose your joy because now you can't read and focus. I find my confidence when I'm on set and I'm doing this interview and I'm in it, I feel confidence. But the second words fall out of my head and I literally can't think of a simple word, my confidence plummets.
Right.
So I want women to know this is more than just the symptom itself. It's the effect that it can have on how you show up every day. And for me, the second it starts to dent my confidence, I'm oh no. I work on my confidence a lot, so I have to pay attention to this. So I don't want women to feel badly about it, but recognize the knock-on effect it can have.
the mental health, besides depression, the anxiety, the attention deficit symptoms. So the executive functioning really goes out the window. And a lot of women are telling me like they are getting set off by things that used to not bother them as much before. They just don't have the same resilience that they used to the same life stressors. So, you know, what frustrated me about, especially the mental health part, is when I started like reviewing and researching the literature, there would always be this caveat in the older studies of this is just a tough time in women's lives. Women tend to have a lot of stress at this age. And like I sit in front of patients every day. Now these are PhDs who are number crunchers and very smart individuals, but they're not doing this. My patients are telling me, F that. My life is stressful. It's always been stressful. There is nothing new in the stress world other than this brain is not working the way that it used to. And help me. You know, what can we do to help?
Yeah, God, the identity crisis that must come along with that, right? Like, because I'm almost feeling it because like if I'm on set, I can't find my words, my confidence starts to dip. And now my identity of like, I'm a good host or I'm the type of person that always wants to do better. And actually I'm doing worse than I used to, not better. That knock-on effect, you said 1 in 5 people quit their job. So imagine your entire identity. Let's say you choose not to have children and you're so passionate about your career and you've spent so many years on it. And then you find yourself in your late 40s or 50s now not having the confidence to do the job that you've been doing.
Right.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Okay. So now we'll go past the head.
Okay. So then one of the next biggest things we see is, you know, we all know the hot flashes. That actually starts in the head. So there's a thermoregulatory center in our brain that has a very nice set point for most of our lives. And in menopause, we see serotonin levels start to change. Beginning in perimenopause. And those neurotransmitters, especially serotonin, will reset the thermoregulatory center in our brain. So hot flashes are one expression of that. You know, and so 85% of us will have hot flashes. And some of them are so disruptive that you're not sleeping at night, you're not able to get through a meeting, you're not, you know, because you're just drenched in sweat. And, you know, when you have sleep disruption, everything gets worse. You can't think the next day, you're cranky, you eat more poorly, you tend to, you know, eat more calories and eat things that are higher in carbs. I mean, all of this like feeds into itself in this whole negative feedback symptom. For years, all the research focused on hot flashes. So if you look at older literature, they basically like symptomatic is hot flashes, night sweats, what they call vasomotor symptoms. Very little recognition around mental health, cognition. It's better now, like since 2020. But forever, menopause was defined by the presence or absence of hot flashes. And the only treatment indications really were, as far as giving you hormones back, were for the severity of the hot flashes, which I think is ridiculous. Women who have severe hot flashes tend to have cardiovascular disease, higher risk of stroke, more visceral fat, yeah. So the hot flashes can be a bell ringer for higher risk of chronic disease.
And the hot flashes, I've heard you say, basically, you either get them when you're sick and you got a fever,
right,
or in menopause.
So why were hot flashes like automatically, you know, why is that the cliche symptom of menopause? Right. Because you can't blame it on anything else unless you have a fever or maybe you have tuberculosis, which we can rule that out pretty easily. Yeah. So that leaves menopause. But you know, what you don't see is like the woman who doesn't have hot flashes, what about her? Well, maybe she has frozen shoulder, or maybe she has gut changes, or maybe she has tinnitus or vertigo, or skin changes, or hair changes. And I was like, oh, you're just aging. And definitely we're aging, but our aging is accelerating through the menopause transition. And what I mean by that is, you know, our organs are all aging roughly at the same rate, except for our ovaries, which age twice as fast as the rest of our body.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and menopause represents when we have no more eggs. So we're born with all of our egg supply, 1 to 2 million. By the time we're 30, the average woman is down to 10% of that egg supply. And by the time we're 40, we're down to 3%.
Wow, that makes complete sense. But so the fact that the sweats are the thing that is an indicator, because up until I get it like a few decades ago, it was if you have the headache, then sleep it off, take a pill. But the night sweats were the thing. It's like, well, you can't dismiss that because there's nowhere else that a woman can go except for, like you said, the fever.
Unless she has a flu or something. So heart, one of the biggest, like I said before, was palpitations. Women are showing up in the emergency room, okay? horrible palpitations, sweating, having nausea, having all these symptoms, and no one is thinking this could be menopause. She's getting $1 million cardiac workup. She's getting, she's having severe head. No one is putting together that this could be the symptomatic expression of her estrogen withdrawal, of her menopause. And so we're spending billions of dollars in healthcare dollars working up all these other things where really the root cause was just estrogen withdrawal. And most women, they're not going to the ED until things are severe. So she's probably been having palpitations for months and months and months and been categorically dismissed, sadly.
Oh God! And then wasn't it like a stat or something that if a woman goes to the doctor and a guy goes to the doctor and they are acting exactly the same and they say exactly the same symptoms, it's something like doctors will prescribe medication for women 16 minutes longer
so for pain. So if she goes to the ED and they have the exact same presentation with pain involved, it's 16 more minutes for her to get a pain med, and she's more likely to be prescribed anti-anxiety medication.
Instead of actually looking at the hormones.
Yeah.
So why are we women with the same symptoms as guys, why does it take us 16 more minutes?
Well, back to, how women in general are studied in medicine and women are treated in medicine. So if we look at the history of NIH funding, NIH in the US is National Institutes of Health. So outside of big pharma research, this is the government institution that funds research in health, And I think their budget is, in the billions. Women's health gets a small percentage of that, but menopause gets 0.03%, 0.03% of the total budget. So, and when we look at, the McKinsey company did this incredible review. They looked at 680 general medical studies. And they found that only 50% looked at health outcomes for sex differences, male versus female. So only half. And it was only since 1993 that women were required to be part of these medical studies from the NIH. So they were worried about it. Women are harder to study because we have cycles and things change during our cycles. And then in perimenopause, it's chaotic. And then postmenopause. So they're like, let's just do men and we're just going to apply what we find to women, except we are not little men with breasts and uteruses. There are so many gender differences or, sex differences in how we respond to medications and how we present in the ED for certain medical conditions that have just not been taught. Now, these things are being recognized now and hopefully we're moving in the right direction. But for you and I, we have a whole generation of clinicians who were trained that women are just little men and this is how they present and these are the medications we should give them. It's a systemic problem and it's a huge ship to course correct, but it's worth doing, but we're gonna have to fight for it.
Yeah, I 1000% agree. Okay, so we're down to the heart.
Yeah, so we did heart. So big, one of the biggest things is palpitations. And so we have like the acute things that happen in menopause. So these are the hot flashes, the night sweats and the palpitations and the brain fog, Then we have the long-term chronic health effects that we'll get to later. Yeah. So I'm talking about atherosclerosis. So when we get to the lungs, we have new onset of asthma that pops up during menopause. Estrogen, as it turns out, is a very powerful anti-inflammatory hormone. So it gives us a level of protection. And when those levels decline, the inflammatory diseases like autoimmune disease, like asthma, we see a resurgence of these things or, in the perimenopause transition. And when you develop asthma as a perimenopausal woman, it's a very atypical asthma and it doesn't respond to the usual treatments, not as well. Yeah.
And so you could potentially have never had asthma before and then it starts to show?
So for myself, never had asthma in my life, I was not an allergic person, never had allergies. I have like penicillin allergy. So since menopause, about 50% of the time when I get an upper respiratory infection, I get a cold, right? I'll sore throat, runny nose, whatever, cough. I get a lot of them because I work in healthcare and I'm constantly seeing patients. And when the virus clears, when it goes down the oropharynx and I develop a cough, I'm developing bronchitis 50% of the time. That is non-infectious and very, very inflammatory. And I usually have to get on steroids in order to get the cough to stop. this is new for me in menopause. And so it's really made me think about, okay, is this how my lungs and my bronchioles are reacting to the loss of estrogen? Even though I'm on hormone replacement, what I tell my patients, nothing's better than your 25-year-old ovaries. I can't put those back inside of you. HRT is great, but it's not going to fix everything, right? We still have to do all of the things, the nutrition, the movement, So,
which I want to make sure, by the way, that we get into the deep things of what we can do after this.
So lungs, so gut, the gut microbiome. So the SOOO nutrition study is one of my favorites.
What's the SOOO nutrition study?
The SOOO nutrition is they came out of the UK and they started studying, I think even before COVID. And it's really the world's largest nutrition study, but they looked at 1,100 women and followed them through perimenopause, postmenopause, and looked at their gut health over time. And, they cross-matched for age, they basically took two unique groups, same groups, and followed them through menopause and found that the gut microbiome changes from that of a healthy female to that of a male.
Whoa!
Through when you lose your estrogen. Now, we have an estrobolome, which is the part of the gut microbiome that recirculates estrogen through the body. So, our gut health is like critical to our overall health, mental health, everything. We all know this now. But that's why women tend to get more bloated or have more GI issues through the menopause transition. So we know that women on hormone therapy, so this is what she did, found the women who were on hormone therapy, their gut was healthier. They had a greater, less than that of a man. Men have less healthy guts than women typically, and as far as their gut microbiome, the diversity. So the more diverse amount of bugs you have in the gut, the healthier you are in general. And so, and the types of predominant microbiome guts, gut bugs are, very specific to female versus male. So they can reverse some of that with hormone therapy.
Wow, that's crazy.
Of course, you must eat the fiber and you must eat all the plants and you must do all the things. That's also very important. But hormone therapy can go a long way there as well.
Knowing you should eat healthy is one thing, but actually doing it day after day is freaking a lot harder. And that's why I utterly recommend my favorite brand, ButcherBox. I literally am obsessed with them, guys, and I eat their food every single day. ButcherBox is a premium meat subscription service that delivers the high quality meats and seafood directly to your door with no added hormones or antibiotics ever. So sign up right now at butcherbox.com/WOI and get our special deal right now. ButcherBox is offering our listeners a free for a year offer plus an additional $20 off. Choose salmon, chicken breast, or steak tips free in every order for an entire year. So sign up today at butcherbox.com/WOI and use code WOI to choose your free for a year offer. Plus you get $20 off your first order right now. Go over, you won't regret it. So the combination of lifestyle, diet, and then the therapy is the key to that. All right, well, sign me up, girl. Okay. And just to enhance what you said about the gut as well, of how that can, I thought it was so woo-woo, I'm just gonna be honest, when my gut really, I felt like it erupted 9 years ago. And everyone's like, no, it's your lifestyle. And I was like, what are they talking about? Like, it's only about the food that I eat. It doesn't have anything to do with hormones. Like, I didn't understand the impact that the gut has on the body and the body has on the gut. And so mood swings, you wanna talk about like the time that I was the most emotionally irregular, where I just couldn't sustain my moods, was when I had the worst gut. So now I'm putting the two together. It's like, okay, well, already lack of estrogen is creating these mood swings, and now your gut, you can't get to equalize the combination.
Right. Oh. It's a lot harder.
Yeah, it's a lot harder.
So much harder. I have to, sleep and my gut are the two things that are non-negotiables for me, and that I have to protect. And so I'm always like, the mantra in my head now when I look at my plate is plants, protein, and fiber. I'm just always like, do I have plants? Do I have enough protein? And is there enough fiber there?
That's a great idea, to have a method that you can make sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the gut.
So then we move on to the, let's go to the musculoskeletal system. Again, estrogen, really powerful anti-inflammatory hormone. Take it away, things tend to get inflamed. We're still aging, right? So we have this level of protection with estrogen. And one of the things like that made the internet explode when I talked about it online is this thing called frozen shoulder. And it is an adhesive capsulitis that pretty much majority occurs in women in the perimenopause and menopause transition. And so it is the capsule around the shoulder joint becomes adhesed. And so women suddenly find you're trying to take a picture with your girlfriends and you can't get your arm to go back, or you can't lift your arm above here, or you're having trouble like brushing your hair in the back because that shoulder joint becomes frozen. And so this is a great story. There were 2 heads of departments at Duke University. I think it was orthopedic surgery and OB-GYN, and they were both female, and I really hope I get these details correct. And they were like, I guess, having lunch one day and said, man, look at all these patients with frozen shoulder. Yeah. And they decided to start pulling charts and do a literature, do research. And they found that women who were on hormone therapy had a much lower incidence of frozen shoulder than those who weren't. So they write this thing up. It's beautifully done. It's a beautiful study. And they cannot get a single orthopedic journal to publish it. So they end up getting one of the menopause journals to publish it. And so I talked about it online, and that was one of my most viral videos, with the women just filling the comment section of, oh my God, that happened to me, that happened to me, that happened to me. And no one told me that it could have been related to my menopause. Not that it would have stopped it, but knowing that it could happen, and knowing that it's not your fault, you didn't do anything wrong, and that getting early and active physiotherapy can decrease the duration. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done to unfreeze that shoulder. And so, I mean, it's just one of the highlights of what is very specific to women and was really ignored, because 93% of orthopedic surgeons are male. And when it doesn't happen to them, it's really hard for someone to understand that this actually could be related to menopause.
Oh my God, and just to think about it, like, if I'm not a doctor, so if you told me like your shoulder's due to your hormones and menopause, I'd be like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Like, I wouldn't have put the 2 together. Now you explain, you break it down, it's like, oh my God, it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So for women, just to think about what this is doing to women's minds and their self-esteem and their confidence, right? You've got this ailment, you go to the doctor, they don't really know how to fix it. No one really gets it. You're not really talking to your friends. So now you feel alone. Now you can't actually go out and enjoy time with your friends and enjoy,
everything hurts.
Everything hurts.
So, frozen shoulder is one thing, but like the arthralgias and the joint pain, the hip pain, I used to wake up with like hip pain at night and think like, I had no injury. I hadn't worked out too hard. I probably wasn't even working out back then anyway. And so you just sit there and think, oh, I'm getting old. Right. And then maybe it's not worth it for me to exercise or do anything because now I'm hurting myself.
So the idea that people can relate, like if you had told me, if I did a video on frozen shoulder and it's gonna go viral, I'd be like, no, it won't. No one has, like, it's so uncommon. So to think about that being one sign of how many elements us women are going through and just not talking about it,
right,
is heartbreaking.
So now, skin is another thing, dry skin. Most women know, my skin, I can like write on my legs and get, just from the dry skin. That I always had oily skin until menopause. So dry skin, dry eyes, dry mouth, dental changes from the drier mouth and the changes in our microbiome around our teeth. So we see a lot of increase of dental problems. We see itchy ears. That's another one that makes the internet go crazy. It's kind of that perfect storm of our nerves become a little more inflamed. So some patients will come in feeling crawling sensations under their skin or just constantly itchy. The really dry, so you've got dry skin combined with, nerve inflammation, and you get these intense itchy patches. And when it's within your ear, they're like, oh my God. So I tell patients, take a little of your vaginal estrogen just on a Q-tip and get it in the ear canal a couple of times a week. And they're like, it's like a miracle.
So like you're actually, when you say vaginal estrogen, you mean basically your
cream.
Juice?
Yeah.
Oh, so not like...
So no, sorry.
So here I am thinking,
medicinally.
As you leave, I get my little...
They don't have any of that anymore. So no, you literally would take your medicinal vaginal estrogen cream, or I'll prescribe them the cream. I'm like, just take a tiny bit a couple of times a week on a Q-tip, just get it in that ear canal, and then their itchy ears will
I'm so glad I asked that question, because
things
would have gone wrong in my house.
I know, in my head, everything with vaginal estrogen is a prescription.
I'm like, okay, your vaginal juice, put it in your ear.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, knowing that that's just part of it is fascinating. Okay, so we're down to, let's talk about then the joints and stuff, because the thing that I hear a lot just growing up was, my grandmother, she falls, she breaks a hip, and then within a couple of years, she got dementia and passed away.
So now we're going to talk about the chronic diseases that are associated with aging, but they accelerate in menopause. And yes, women live longer than men, but we're living 25% of our lives in poorer health than our male counterparts. So where men tend to be pretty functional until the very, very end, and then they have a heart attack or something, not to say that that's going to be all men, but this is the trend. Most men will actually have a very full life, a short, debilitated end, and then die, okay? Women are not doing that. Women are spending 5 to 10 years demented and debilitated and requiring long-term care. Even though we're living longer, it's in very, very poor health in general. And so taking aggressive stances in menopause, hormone therapy, changing your diet, focusing your exercise can really move that needle the other way. So here are the things that women don't realize and things that I picked up in my clinic. So in 2021, I decided to focus my medical care only treating menopausal women. And I started seeing trends in blood work, cholesterol. 80% of my patients have new onset high cholesterol, meaning high LDL, lower HDLs, the negative effect, the bad cholesterol goes up and the good cholesterol goes down. And they are no changes in diet and exercise. And this is a sudden increase. And so that SOOO nutrition study I was talking about earlier, they were tracking that and they see men versus women. Men have this very linear course of hypertension, blood pressure goes up, their cholesterol goes up, all the indicators for heart disease. It's kind of age, it goes up like this. Women, we enjoy a much lower course until perimenopause. And then it cranks up and surpasses the men. So the most likely thing a woman's going to die from is cardiovascular disease. Women don't realize that. And we are getting mistreated in the hospital. We're 7 times more likely to die from a heart attack in the hospital than a man because it takes them longer to figure out it's actually a heart attack because we have an atypical presentation. But why does this happen? So the cholesterol is directly related to declining estrogen levels and how it affects the liver. And women on hormone therapy, especially early, have a more advantageous cholesterol profile. So we're rushing to put women on statins, which have never been shown to decrease the rates of heart attack in women, primary heart attacks in a woman, or decrease her rate of death from a heart attack. And they have a lot of side effects. So yeah, her cholesterol goes down, but it's not helping her risk of heart attack. There are other cholesterol-lowering medications that probably work better in women, but we're routinely recommending them for women when they've only been shown to be helpful in men. Baby aspirin, how many times have you seen one of your parents, aunts, uncles on a baby aspirin to decrease their risk of a heart attack? Only in men. Never been shown to be helpful in women.
So we've seen these studies work, but the studies are done just on men. And so because the female's more complex, we just blanket statement, put them on for women as well,
Right.
assuming that it's doing the same, having the same effect.
Right, and we're just attributing everything to aging and not really taking into account how menopause is accelerating these things and how intervention can help. And we can decrease suffering. And not only, women don't want to live longer. They want to live healthier. So they don't want to have their family having to take care of them for 10, 15 years, 5 years, however long that last slog is. I mean, I tell my kids, I want to die like my dad. I want to die like a man. My mother's been on a walker for 10 years, and she's now in the end stages of dementia. And we're struggling with having to, how do we intervene for mom, to make sure she's safe and everything. She wants to stay in her house, but that's becoming impossible. I don't want my kids to have these conversations, protracted conversations that my siblings and I are having every day. And the decisions I'm making right now are going to affect that, that course that I'm gonna have.
God, yeah, everyone listening, it really doesn't matter what age you're at. Like if you're the age of 30, it's coming for you. It's like if you're 40 or 45 like I am, I know I'm about to, or potentially in perimenopause. So to think that every single woman, if you're alive, every single woman's going to go through it.
If you're lucky enough to live long enough, your ovaries will fail.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have to deal with the consequences. Now, those consequences look different for each of us. You and I are going to have very different courses as far as the outside symptomatology, hot flashes, night sweats, joint pain, whatever. But all of our cholesterol tends to go up. Our vitamin D goes down because of our gut health. So I just started seeing these trends in clinic, and I'm like, no one taught me this. We're not talking about this, and how interventions, nutrition, diet, exercise are going to decrease the burden of disease as she ages, right? And so let's talk about osteoporosis, okay? 50% of women will fall or will have an osteoporotic fracture before they die.
50%.
And we can decrease that dramatically. How do we do that? Hormone therapy is one. So the musculoskeletal unit works together. And when we go through the menopause transition, visceral fat goes up, muscle goes down.
Why does visceral fat go up?
So visceral fat, I wrote a whole book about that. So visceral fat is the fat that is deposited amongst our intra-abdominal organs. So it's the fat wrapping around our omentum, around the liver, sometimes around the heart, the pericardial fat, the fatty liver disease, that's all the visceral fat. That fat is very different than this fat, okay?
And
we demonized subcutaneous fat for women for years. Now, genetically, you and I probably have never had much of the curves, right? And we've worked hard to, but that fat is genetic and usually not dangerous. It's just a different body shape.
And for people to hear or know, I didn't quite understand this until my husband explained. He's like, babe, when you've got those guys that have those hard bellies, where they've got a tiny butt, and they've got the thin arms, and then they've got this belly that is just hard. That is what you're calling the visceral fat, where the fat is almost around your organs, versus you got a saggy butt, and so the fat is just almost within the skin.
Within the skin,
yeah.
Right. Okay. So visceral fat is metabolically much more active than subcutaneous fat, and it's very, very dangerous. It's very pro-inflammatory, and it increases. So the statistic blows my mind. So a woman in premenopause will have 8% of her fat will be visceral fat, okay? She goes through the menopause transition, changes nothing about her diet and exercise. That goes up to 23%.
Whoa!
23%. I don't have to tell a woman this who's been through menopause. She knows her abdomen, and that is the biggest pain point that women were coming into my office was what is happening here.
Like I haven't changed anything. My diet's been the same.
And so what was I taught in medical school? That's impossible. Oh, women tend to move less. Put down the fork. Da 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 da. She's like, I'm eating nothing. I'm eating healthy. And this has happened. So it really, that was the turning point for me, was listening to them, believing them, and then diving into the science to figure out what the hell was going on and learning about how it's related to menopause and estrogen decline, and all the things, which is the Galveston diet, that's the premise behind that. And then that conversation just exploded to all menopause. And, what started out for me, which was a very probably vain journey to get rid of some belly fat, became, what are we doing to women? Why are we not focusing on helping them get stronger so they don't fall and break a hip? Because if you fall and break that hip, you have a 30% chance of death in 1 year, even with surgery. If you don't have the surgery, if you're not well enough to have the surgery, which a lot of women aren't, you're gonna have a 78, in the 70% chance of death. And that year is horrible, marked with massive decline. So we can decrease that probably by 50%. How do we do that? We eat enough protein. We lift heavy. There's certain supplements that can be helpful. Oral calcium is not helpful. Does not increase your bone density. A lack of calcium in your diet is not great, but just swallowing calcium supplements has never been shown to decrease the risk of fracture. So really getting the message clear on strong over skinny and nutrition over calories and, lowering your inflammation naturally as much as possible and doing the work. If you're not moving your body to become stronger, you will lose muscle. That is what we're genetically programmed to do, and it accelerates through menopause. It's not inevitable, but we have to work at it.
And if you lose the muscle mass, it's your muscles that burn your calories.
Right.
So if you're eating 1,500 calories every single day for 20 years, and you have, let's say, 10% muscle mass, and that declines, and that goes to 7% muscle mass. Now you have less muscle. So
that's your basal metabolic rate, right? And so you end up in that yo-yo pattern of starving yourself to get down, reducing the calories, and then you lose muscle. Severe caloric restriction, which is where we worry about GLP-1s, and if I ever have a patient on them, we're counseling them extensively.
What's GLP-1?
Oh, like the incretins, like the Ozempics and the Wegovys and the semaglutides. So, I think they can be a really powerful tool for patients, and I do prescribe them, but it's with massive counseling of, we must eat the protein, we must do the resistance training, we don't want to sacrifice muscle to get to a number on the scale, because then you're going to end up less healthy at the end, and not able to maintain your weight.
So if someone is, let's say, going through menopause and they really, their self-esteem is diving, they've got this weight that they can't get rid of, and so you may prescribe them Ozempic or something like that, but it needs to also be piled on with healthy nutrition and then weightlifting specifically.
Exactly. So we, it's not for everyone.
Sure.
I think it can be a really powerful tool, but it's not, I don't think of it as a miracle. Some of my patients think it's a miracle because they've worked their whole lives, and it's taken up so much mental space for them, and to take that mental part of it off the table. I've never had that, so it's hard for me to understand, but to listen to them and watch family members who struggled for their entire lives, suddenly to have that mental chatter of food being taken off the table, and now they can think about exercise and nutrition. It gives them that space to build out the rest of their lives in a healthier way. It's really amazing. But, when the patients come in, I have an hour with my patients, and I'm very fortunate that I can run a clinic like that. And they have to unpack their menopause trauma. So we have to give them time and space to do that. And then we have a full discussion on hormone therapy, nutrition, exercise. I usually bring them back a few weeks later. And then, I have a body scanner where I'm measuring muscle mass and visceral fat. We're having very intense conversations around that. So it's kind of a stepwise progression. Also, testosterone can be really helpful for muscle mass and bone density as well.
Okay, so that was so beautifully broken down. And so just to make sure that I understand, though, the visceral fat is always, it goes to the belly. Because I was always wondering, why is it always the belly fat as women get older? Is it that it's becoming visceral fat?
Right. Yeah. So you do have a little more subcutaneous fat here, and that frustrates women because they don't like the way it looks. Yeah. But really, it's for the health reasons and the long-term health consequences, it's the intra-abdominal fat.
Got it. Okay, and I actually, do you know Dr. Amen, the brain doctor? So Dr. Amen once said to me, and this has always stuck with me, genetics are the bullet in the gun, your lifestyle's the finger on the trigger.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's quite accurate, at least somewhat, when it comes to menopause, where it's look, you're going to go through it's genetics, your gender, you're a female, but your lifestyle will, and how you handle it will dictate whether it's a torture where you really feel like you want to sadly end your life, or that it's navigatable?
To some point, there are trends, right? So we know that women who have an anti-inflammatory diet, like more Mediterranean or Galveston diet-esque nutrition, tend to have less outward symptoms. So less hot flashes, less joint pain. They do kind of better through the transition. But that being said, you can have a woman with perfect nutrition who can suffer horribly. But in the trends, we do tend to see that women are less symptomatic in general if they have a healthier lifestyle and can maintain it going through the menopause transition. But nothing we know of yet will extend the shelf life of the ovary. So there's lots that we can do to decrease the shelf life of the ovary, like have surgery. So you have a hysterectomy, you lose 4 years off the life of your ovary.
You lose 4 years?
Yes.
Whoa.
There's a disrupted blood supply to the ovary coming from the uterine side. When we surgically remove that uterus, we cut that blood supply. So we lose about 4 years. And I never counseled my patients about that. And that I didn't know. And now I just scream it from the rooftops, about, look, if you medically need a hysterectomy, absolutely, can be life-changing for people. But you need to remember that you're going to go through menopause 4 years earlier than you would have. You have a tubal ligation, it's about 1.5 years.
What is it?
1.5 years.
No, a tubal.
Oh, tubal ligation. You have your tubes tied as contraception. So again, we're disrupting blood flow there. And so women tend to go through menopause 1.5 years early. Your genetics play a huge role. I always ask my patients, when they're perimenopausal, how old was your mom? I don't know. We don't talk about it. Go home and talk about it, Genetics play a big part of it. If you smoke, you lose years. If you don't have any children, you lose years because you ovulate more.
And when you say you lose years, you mean you go into menopause earlier?
Sooner.
Right.
Sooner. So it's
weight as well, I believe, right?
so plus or minus. If you're super thin, you tend to go through a little sooner, and if you're obese, you tend to go through earlier. So normal weight, you tend to keep,
Of course.
Yeah. So that kind of goes both ways.
Yeah, I mean, you list a bunch in your book, and it was fascinating to me.
To me too. I mean, no one taught me these things. I knew about, chemotherapy and radiation but I remember reading it, and when I was preparing for the book, being like, how many hysterectomies did I do where I did not warn the patients that, we're leaving her ovaries behind for a good reason, that she would go through menopause sooner. Like, this just wasn't common knowledge and I was a very well-trained OBGYN.
Unfortunately, you didn't know, right? So
Right.
it's like you can't really beat yourself up over that, but I totally understand. But thinking through that, and then you said something like, if you've been sexually abused,
Yes.
I was like, what the hell?
So I think it was 9 years. Yeah. So if they were sexually abused as a child and their child was sexually abused, they go through menopause like 7 to 9 years sooner than they would. That puts them in like premature menopause level. And that's a super high risk category for chronic disease.
Wow. So the menopause then basically activates the potential to chronic disease, which is why it's so dangerous, because if we are doing things, obviously the sexual thing that is unavoidable
It just highlights that chronic stress will take life off of your ovary.
Right. Exactly, yeah. What about an abortion, if you've had an abortion before?
I didn't see any data on either termination or miscarriages. Here's the thing. Every month that we ovulate, we lose about 11,000 eggs with each cycle to get one egg out
Jesus.
to ovulate. It's not a very efficient process. And so the women who are not ovulating, either from oral contraception, tend to preserve their ovaries a little bit longer. It's not a huge amount. And then women who are pregnant 2 times have the longer ovarian life. So no pregnancy, you tend to ovulate more. Right? So like nuns who don't need, people who don't need contraception are ovulating, they tend to go through a little bit earlier. But if you have a lot of children, probably stress. So if you have more than 4 children, you tend to go through menopause earlier than you would have as if you'd had 2 children.
So again, if you don't have any kids, you go into menopause earlier. And if you have too many kids, you go into menopause earlier.
For different reasons.
Yeah, interesting
reasons.
how it's different reasons, but it's still... And
so I can't imagine if you terminate a pregnancy, that's never an easy decision for a woman, or if you have a miscarriage. So these are high stress situations. So I think you would go through sooner.
Because of the stress. So thinking through all of these, like there's certain things that, right, you don't want to make decisions based on your menopause going, sooner or later, but to at least understand, because you look at either your friends, right, and you compare yourself to your friends or other women or women in your family. And so thinking that it's a problem, quote unquote, with you, or there's something wrong with you. I love that you just debunk it, because you're like, look, this is just how it is. If it's this, then it's this. If it's this, then it's this, and the knock-on effect. And so for me, who I haven't had a child, I have massive gut issues, I haven't had a period in like over 10 years, you better believe I'm like, okay, I'm counting the days, I'm 40, I'm about to turn 45, like, I'm not scared, I don't worry about it, I'm not tense, I just love the knowledge that I know, A, what I'm about to face, and then B, what can I do about it? And so that's where I'd love to now take this discussion in talking about the impact that it can have on you, and then we'll talk about what to do. But hearing the stats that it's almost up to 70% of women initiate divorce between the age of, I think, 45 and 60. When
the divorces happen. Yeah. So I have a couple of patients who are divorce attorneys, female divorce attorneys, and they feel very strongly about this. And they said, listen, women divorce for many reasons, and they do initiate the divorces more than men. Women are more likely to say, I'm out, than a man. Men tend to be a lot happier in marriage than women. So go figure.
Yeah.
But women menopause is very freeing in some ways. It really a lot of women I find are finally able to prioritize themselves, because they are just not doing well, and they realize, if I don't take care of me, I see the path I'm headed down and I don't want to go there. So they all of a sudden boundaries go up. They're prioritizing their own health, their own mental health, their own physical health, and people who used to depend on them to always be available get upset. So women are realizing they're not in a great relationship. They stayed in a relationship for the kids or for financial reasons or whatever, but now they're no longer willing to do so. The sexual dysfunction breaks up a lot of marriages. So we see, and I was just looking at these stats, we see probably 50% of women will have, at all times, if you poll all the women today, 50% will have some form of sexual dysfunction right now. Okay, now that could be, there's kind of 5 buckets when we talk about female sexual function. We have an orgasmic disorder where they can't have an orgasm, okay?
So you can get turned on, you just can't climax?
Right, so for women that's primary or secondary. So primary or anorgasmia is and that's about 10 to 15% of women will never in their lives have an orgasm. They don't talk about it. No one's prioritizing their health. And imagine if that was 10 to 15% of men. What would happen in medical research?
Oh, you would get Viagra would be made.
Like whatever, So then there's secondary anorgasmia, and we see this a lot in perimenopause. So the time to orgasm can get a lot longer, and the intensity of the orgasm becomes less because we're changing down there. The loss of estrogen is leading to decreased blood flow to the area, the tissues become thinner, we can have pain. So pain's another bucket. So if you have pain with intercourse, usually due to some form of genital urinary syndrome of menopause, GSM, or vaginal atrophy is the older term, or senile vagina. Senile vagina is the term that was used like 20 years ago.
Oh God.
Yeah.
I don't mean to laugh, but the laughing is out. I can't believe how ridiculous that it was accepted that we could call a vagina senile, but really it's menopause.
It's menopause. So that loss of estrogen, those tissues from the pubic bone all the way to the sacrum are heavily dependent on estrogen for their health and their vitality and their ability to fight off disease. So the best treatment, recurrent UTIs, urinary sepsis is a huge reason for an elderly woman to be admitted to the hospital, okay? What is the best form? 50% decreased rates of recurrent UTIs and sepsis would be vaginal estrogen, putting estrogen back in the vagina, localized. It's very safe, it's very low dose. None is absorbed into the system. So even a patient with active estrogen-dependent cancer could use vaginal estrogen safely with no worries of increasing her recurrence. But we're not offering it.
And that is a prescription that you go to get your doctor.
Yeah. So, there's just so much out there. So pain. So how do we treat vaginal pain due to GSM? Vaginal estrogen works almost 100% of the time. Restore the health of the tissue, give her a break, tell her nothing down there until this tissue heals, and then try again.
This is all going to be like a lining of your products, right? That you're going to start to sell.
Now, lubricants, there are lubricants and things that can kind of help, but it's not treating the root cause, which is restoring the health of the tissue. I think all women should use lubricants. I just think they're fun and they can decrease friction and just make everything easier. So maybe one day I'll come up with a vaginal lubricant. And then there's arousal disorder. So arousal disorder is usually when a man's suffering from low libido. It's really an arousal disorder. He's having trouble having an erection. There's nothing wrong in his brain, saying, I want to do this. Most men usually want to do it. But for women, where I see the marriages fall out is
if you're struggling to find the energy just to do the things that you love, or you feel like that fogginess in the brain just won't lift. A lot of these symptoms actually stem from a minerals deficiency that is super common and also totally solvable, which is why I'm absolutely obsessed and love and take Beam Mineral Liquid supplements every single day. And I just absolutely love how simple it is, guys, because you don't need a kitchen full of mineral supplements. You just need one small serving per day, and that is it. So guys, I really truly recommend that you give Beam Minerals a try right now. Head over to beamminerals.com and enter code NYBBS for Nurture Your Bad Bitch Soul at checkout for 20% off your first order. That's beamminerals.com and enter code NYBBS. Nurture Your Bad Bitch Soul at checkout for 20% off your first order.
They're having untreated pain and they're just turning their partner, because it hurts so much and it breaks up that relationship. Or they're having HSDD, which is the most common thing, hypoactive sexual desire disorder. That is in the brain. That is the signal to your brain that this is a good idea and we want to do this. And that tends to go very, very low in the perimenopause transition. And so multiple treatment options for that. We have FDA-approved medications. We have testosterone, which is shown in menopausal women to be very, very helpful. Here's the problem. Doctors aren't asking, they're not offering. They're telling women this is the time of your life, we'll have some wine, go home and just do it, and you just put up with it. And it's ridiculous. So.
God, and then to think about all of that happening. So you're no longer aroused by your partner. It's both physical and mental. You go to the doctor to seek help. They're just like, suck it up, drink wine, give it up, like whatever the words are. And now you're definitely not feeling sexy after that. And so to then think about how then that has a knock-on effect in the actual relationship itself, because I've been married for 21 years.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, forget about just not the intimacy itself, because I'm very much advocate for, I think sex is very important in relationships. And the thing me and my husband always said is we'll never have a relationship that has bed death, which is we don't have the intimacy. And so when I think about how women are struggling, they don't have the same arousal that they used to. Now, to your point, their partner now almost feels like, is it me? They're not attracted to me. And then they make it about them. What that can do in that relationship dynamic.
So here's what's also happening. He's having trouble having an erection, which is a normal part of aging for a man. Most men will have a decrease in the ability to have an erection, right? He goes to the doctor. Within 2 minutes, he's given a prescription for a Viagra or one of the other, Cialis or one of those meds, okay? And they work great for most men. He goes home to a woman who's having pain or hyperactive sexual desire. I'm like, where do those doctors think those Viagra-laden penises are going? Like, no one's asking, how is she doing? Is she having pain? So there's a big mismatch. And here's 2023, they looked at the data last year. 85% of women are going to the doctor and complaining of some symptom of menopause. And usually the cliche ones, okay? Not the joint pain, because most doctors don't get that yet, right? But like hot flashes, all docs know. A woman over 45 not having a period with a hot flash, she's in menopause, right? Only 10% are being offered any therapy at all. And the majority of those women are being offered an antidepressant, which is a killer to most women's libido.
Oh, yeah.
So you finally get the bravery up enough to go and ask. You're not being given the gold standard treatment, which is hormone therapy, and you're given an SSRI, which has tons of side effects and is killing your libido.
What are you doing with your husband in order to make sure that you don't become another statistic?
We have had our ups and downs like every marriage. Yes. And at 35, I thought I was on top of the world. I had a great life at 35. So my kids were like little and they loved mommy, and I was in great shape. I mean, I looked good. I probably, was over exercising to be thin. I loved my job, and I never would have imagined that over the next 15 years that I would lose 2 brothers and my dad, that I would, leave a position that I loved to go out on a total whim and do something crazy. I would never imagine going through a pandemic. I would never imagine leaving the country for 2 years to go support my husband in his work. I would never imagine that I would almost get a divorce. And so that my marriage would get worse and then better, and that I would stand on a stage or sit in a podcast at, 20 years later and be able to talk about it. And so I found my voice to tell him what I really needed. And that really came with learning to prioritize my own needs over that of my, so that I had to put on my own oxygen mask so that I could take care of the needs of my family. And thank God he went with it. He could have just lived that way forever and been happy. He was kind of that typical guy. He didn't see it until I pointed it out to him, and it took him a minute to figure it out. Like he was kind of the typical TikTok guy for a while of, oh, you think I'm so horrible, da da da. I'm like, no, I'm just telling you that this isn't working for me. And I got counseling. So that I went to therapy and I worked on me because I wanted things to be better for our family, and realized that, and then once I replaced my hormones, I changed my diet, I changed my exercise, I got therapy, I prioritized myself. Like, that's where I am today.
There's so much beauty there in that story. The idea that it's never too late.
Never.
And the fact that you said that you are happier now than you've ever been in your 50s. And going back to where we started, where you said 1 in 5 women quit, just understanding and knowing it doesn't have to be like that. That the brain fog, everything that makes us feel badly about ourselves, that can potentially then lead to suicide or divorce and like all of these things happening so late in our life, it doesn't have to be like that. And to hear that you are like the canary in the coal mine, if you will, that you just have shown that. You've shown that if I just prioritize myself, this isn't actually neglecting my family, because I think that that's sometimes what happens, where it's like, I'm gonna do me now. And I get it, you've spent your entire life serving other people. So now you're like, it's time for me. I'm in my 50s, when am I gonna get my time? It's gonna be now. In being able to do it, like I'm taking care of myself for the sake of my family, for the sake of my relationship, for the sake of my future. And now you saying it's the best time of my life, I need people to hear that. That's so strong, girl. That's so strong.
And I want, I went on a limb to open a menopause clinic, which didn't exist.
Oh, yeah.
I got to pick and choose the medicine I wanted to practice. And my husband was fully, he was like, do it. I didn't know if it'd be successful. I didn't know if anyone would ever come, And he said, this is the time. And if it fails, it fails. But you'll never know until you try. And this is your passion. This is what you want to do. And I took my girlfriends out to dinner and I was like, do you think this will work? Like, would you come to me? And they're like, of course, this will work. Trust me, you know what you're doing. And I opened a practice that no one really was doing, or very, very few people. I've found others throughout the country, the menopause, what we call them, who are practicing medicine the way
menopause.
Yeah. So
that's amazing.
The menopause is me not, so when I first started talking about menopause on social media, I felt like I was very alone. And I was getting a lot of pushback from other gynecologists who were on social media who were like, what are you talking about? Hormones kill people, cancer, just get over it. Menopause is no big deal. You're making it a big deal.
And I'm betting you a lot of those were women as well.
They were. And I just kept digging down and going deeper, because the comments I was getting back, thank you, you're helping me, you're giving me tools, you're educating. And so then I found Kelly Casperson, who's a urologist, and she does a tremendous amount of education on female sexual health. Like everything I know about libido and sexual wellness, I learned from her. So shameless plug for her book, You Are Not Broken. And she and I just became really fast friends, texting all the time. And, we're kind of fighting the establishment, because there really is the old menopause versus the new menopause. And there are people who are entrenched in the idea that this is a normal, natural part of life, and you should just soldier on and get through it and only take hormones if there's no other option, because they might kill you. And that is ridiculous. And we are harming women in the process. And we're causing earlier deaths, more debilitation, more disease, than if we embrace, I'm not saying not embrace your menopause, absolutely. But what worked for you in your 30s is probably not gonna work for you in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I'm just trying to lay out some actionable items that you can do to change the trajectory of your health for the rest of your life. And finding other women who are just as smart as I am, believe in the research as much as I do. It's just the most beautiful thing ever.
And I think that that's what we're feeling now, right? Is that now more and more women aren't ashamed, we're not embarrassed, we're willing to speak up, we're willing to support each other now that we're not alone. And it's bringing women together. And when we think about women coming together to really support each other, that's when real change matters. And instead of, lifting each other up, exactly. You said something earlier that really hit me, and it was so sweet, and I don't know if you meant to say it or realize it, but you said when clients were coming in and, they were coming up to you, and you said, I just started to believe them.
Yeah. So,
like, that really hit me.
So, in the medical system and the way I was trained and what I was taught was that women tend to somaticize their physical, giving a psychological reasoning to a biological cause. And that somaticization means that you're having a physical expression of a psychological disease.
Can you give us like an example of that?
So you are depressed and you're having fatigue and lethargy. Okay. So you always had to look for the psychological reasoning. And even today, when I'm with patients, I still have to block that part of my brain, because that was 20 years of being ingrained that this is just that time of her life and it's just really tough. I have to really listen to her and believe her. And once I started doing that, I empower my patients. I may not have the answer right away, But once I like left that part of my training behind and actually leaned in and listened to the patient and believed her, my patients were leaving with hope instead of feeling gaslit and dismissed. And that to me is everything. And so, being able to arm people with that information on social media and give them tools and give them studies and give them hope is everything to me.
Yeah, and this is why your work is so important, because it needs to start somewhere. And the fact that you're speaking up, that you're saying, the past, and you're admitting where, the way the medical field was and where we're going now, to think through as a woman that I can watch you own that and then be so transparent about what we need to do now, voicing these problems, voicing that it's not all in our head, then just makes me almost go, well, hang on a minute. Okay, I'm listening to you and now I really trust you. Now I just need to start trusting myself. Because if I'm not going to the doctor to seek help, like my mom, to think that she said that she would bleed so much, she would have to change her tampon like every 30 minutes. And I was just like, oh, that sucks, mom. But to never really give my mom like the attention because she's going through it, and then to think that I'm about to go through it. So I don't care how old you are listening to this. If you're 20, it's coming for you. And so how do we start to paint a beautiful path of where to go next? And I think you said this very profoundly, hope.
Hope.
You are now allowing women to have the hope that it doesn't have to be like that. And so you've spoken about actually like diet and things like that.
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about that, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
What are the worst foods for you right now that people are eating that don't realize actually are contributing to either early menopause or enhancing your symptoms?
So the jury's out on like, are we cutting the life short on the ovary? We haven't really looked at that yet. We think that the more pro-inflammatory your diet is, which is high in really processed foods, added sugars, really the typical Western diet, high in saturated fats, high in processed foods, just the wrong combination, and really meaning well. I mean, a lot of people live in a food desert and don't have a lot of options and just, have to eat what they can eat. But we know that their lives are shorter. They're not as healthy. But if you have the options and the choice, what can you do? So, my top things that I talk to my patients about are make sure you're getting enough fiber, okay? And that's gonna come and try to get most of that fiber from food. I love a fiber supplement. I actually love your bars, like 12 grams.
They're so freaking fibrous, oh my God.
I love them. And so, I always have one somewhere because I know I can get my, if I'm falling short on protein, especially during travel, and not having timed meals, is that, I can grab one of those shameless plugs.
Shameless plugs for Quest Nutrition.
Yeah. But fiber is key. Fiber is going to improve the health of your gut microbiome. It's going to slow the absorption of glucose into the bloodstream. It is going to keep you full longer. It's going to feed your gut microbiome and keep the little bugs healthier. It has so many purposes. And then the foods that are rich in fiber also have anthocyanins, vitamins, minerals, cofactors, like all the things to make all of your enzymes work well. So I'm like, if you're just gonna focus on one thing, I'm like, fiber.
All right, name me 5 food fibers that you'd be like, if you have any of these 5, I'm happy.
Avocado. That's my superpower. Like I thank God I love them, but I'm pretty much an avocado a day girl.
One whole one a day?
Packed with healthy fats, got my fiber going, keeps me full. They're freaking delicious. I throw them in a smoothie, I throw them in a salad. I'll eat them just out of the shell, with some tahini or something on them. I love them. I love beans. So chickpeas, when I'm throwing a salad together, I almost have beans every single day somehow. And like one of my things I love to make is I'm Cajun. So I have like red beans all the time. My grandmother taught me how to make them and I just put them together in a crock pot. And so I'm either having those as a side or with lunch or, that's really something I try to eat every day. Full of fiber, packed with nutrients, so good for you. Anything that crunches. So,
except for potato chips.
Yeah. So your broccoli, your asparagus, your really cruciferous vegetables are going to be really high in fiber. Berries are super high in fiber and delicious. So I'm trying to eat a side of berries or throw berries in a smoothie or do something with that. Your seeds and nuts. another way to kind of round out really high fiber as well.
Are there any specific nuts that you recommend that are more higher in fiber than others?
I tell my patients to, again, as tolerated, but mix it up, because each nut is going to have a unique nutritional profile, and the more varied your diet is, you tend to be healthier. And so though I tend to eat a lot of the same things every day, I do mix up, so if I'm making a salad, I'll try to remember, did I have sesame seeds on that one? Okay, let's do almonds on this one, so I'm always kind of mixing up, nuts every day.
That's so cool. I'm currently on Brazil nuts that I'm eating because I'm low in selenium. So I'm taking Brazil nuts, but I'm a very tell me what to eat, tell me what to do, how many a day.
Most of my patients aren't getting enough magnesium. So I'm like, keep those pumpkin seeds handy, and I like them roasted with a little bit of salt. I love all my nuts roasted. And so that's a really nice source of magnesium for a lot of patients as well.
Okay, that's really good to know. And then just for anyone listening that may not know, check the oils that your nuts are roasted in.
Yeah, I usually just tell them, roast them in the oven yourself. You don't have to add an oil to it. So I'll just buy the raw nuts, and I'll just take a sheet pan and put them in there. And sometimes my daughter taught me to do it in the air fryer. And so you can roast your nuts. You have to put something over the slats at the bottom, but you can just roast them and shake them.
I had no idea.
In the air fryer.
I'm too lazy, so I normally buy them, but I'm very obsessed with checking to see what ingredients, because some places cook
they'll add stuff
in like canola oil, and it's like, well, you're having nuts because you think they're healthy, but it's cooked in canola oil, which is a vegetable oil, so that doesn't help. And then I also have what they called sprouted nuts as well, because I've got gut issues. It's actually way easier on my gut.
Oh, good.
Do sprouted nuts make any difference to anything else, or just your digestion?
I haven't seen any data. Again, menopause outside of hot flashes is so new, and really the good research is starting to explode here, thanks to you and celebrities and all this attention being paid to menopause right now. So, and it's really spurring a lot of investment, some good, some bad. There's some snake oil out there, and buyer beware. Just because it has Meno in front of it, it may be Meno washing. So
is that a thing, Meno washing?
Oh yeah, Meno washing is like taking something that's been around forever and a probiotic. I love a good probiotic, but there's nothing special really that we know, and so just saying it's a menopause probiotic there's really no data to support that yet. So, but I do, there's good studies looking at different probiotics on women who are in menopause and seeing lower blood pressure, lower visceral fat. I mean, it's part of a healthy diet. Again, try to get your probiotics through food, but if you can't, you can supplement.
And through food is what, like kimchi?
So, kimchi, miso, anything that's fermented, Chinese pickles, and then most Americans can get it through yogurt. But again, you could take really healthy yogurt and mess it up. So you can dump sugar, and I don't love restriction. Again, eating disorders, but one of the things I do counsel patients about is watching your added sugars. So women who limit their added sugars added in cooking and processing, not naturally found in fruits and vegetables, added in cooking processes and alcohol, keeping those less than 25 grams a day, women really do better. There's the sweet spot there. So I have trouble with blood sugar naturally, I was born that way. I wear my glucose monitor. We talked about that earlier. I have very little added sugar in my diet per day. If I want something sweet, I'll have a handful of berries.
And you just monitor them. And the reason why, just for people listening, that sugar isn't great is because it is an inflammatory.
It's pro-inflammatory. Great studies showing added sugar intake, usually through high fructose corn syrup and a lot of the drinks, and condiments and things that are added, and then looking at inflammatory blood markers, 4, 6, 8 hours after a meal and seeing those spike.
Yeah, people don't realize things like ketchup and salad dressings and things like that have all these hidden things. And so that's really where it's like, I'm so, I love this shit. I love geeking out.
So most Americans are getting about 100 grams of added sugar per day, when women should only have 25. So my kids love the Starbucks and all that. And, I loved them for a long time too. But when you look at the added sugar, I hate to demonize Starbucks because they're all doing it. But, it's really, I tell people just drink water, make your own coffee. You're probably better off in what you can add to it. And really, you can limit it that way.
Yeah. And plus, I think that what you're doing is really educating people. And then people can live whatever lives they that they choose, but knowing what they're choosing versus being surprised when you get to 50 and you don't understand why all of this has happened. So if you want the Starbucks, go have the Starbucks, but just know it's an inflammatory and that it can have an impact, especially as you go into menopause.
Yeah.
Okay, so those were the fiber. What else do you said protein?
Yeah, protein intake. So when I wrote Galveston Diet, it was all about weight loss and menopause and visceral fat. But what I've learned since, so I kind of developed that program in 2018. But again, this is an explosive area. And reading, Stacey Stem's research, she really just looks at women and exercise and muscle mass and all the things. And Dr. Gabriella Lyon, her book, Forever Strong, she's amazing. I was not getting enough protein to support what my goals are long term. And most women are getting maybe 50 to 60 grams of protein per day. They're not prioritizing protein in their meals. And for me, at my height and weight and what my goals are, I need 100 to 120 a day. And so when I'm talking to patients, especially, again, I have a muscle mass measurer. If she's coming in sarcopenic or low muscle mass, I'm really setting those goals higher. And for her, it's really hard concept for them because it's nothing we've ever talked about. And they feel like they're going to get fat. And so I'm like, no, you're just going to get strong. We're just feeding your muscles and allowing them to grow. They need that substrate in order to keep you strong and keep you from falling and keep you from breaking a hip.
And thinking about why people think that, I think it becomes like our age, right? So I'm 44.
Oh, yeah. I exercise only to be skinny.
Yeah, like
my whole life.
The way we were brought up with like the aerobics and the Jane Fondas and stuff.
Aerobics,
it's like
aerobics.
Yeah, that's right. I heard you say. So to think about, for us, it's unwiring the messaging we were taught when we were young. Fat equals fat. Like that's what we were taught. If you eat fat, it means you're going to get fat. As a woman, if you lift the weight, you're going to bulk up. It's like, I wish it was that bloody easy. Trust me, like really. I've been trying to build muscle for years. So I think where we are right now is unwiring the belief system we had as when we were kids. So hopefully the younger generation, though, that are growing up have things like your book and your information that they're not unwiring it. So when you tell them things like, hey, you need over 100 grams of protein, they're not resistant to it. Versus when we were younger, it's like, Jesus, you don't eat that. Yeah, you don't eat that. And just so for people at home to know, what a chicken breast is roughly around 25 grams of protein.
Right. Chicken breasts, probably 20, depending on the size. So 3 to 4 ounces is probably 25 grams. I have a nutrition tracker that I use. So my daughter, my oldest, is in medical school now. So talk about keep you honest. Yeah. And her undergraduate degree was in nutrition. So she was always fact checking me constantly. And so she turned me on to the nutrition tracker that they were using in her training, in her undergrad program. So, and that, it's called Chronometer, but there's several good ones out there. But this one was really developed for nutrition majors. And it really taught me so much about, and of course you can become obsessive with it, but I'd never really tracked anything outside of calories before. And learning to track, what's your magnesium intake? How much fiber are you getting? What amount of protein? And not worrying about calories was so freeing. And it turned my mindset from a place of restriction to a place of, am I getting enough?
Yes.
And that was such a beautiful thing for me. And it's funny because when I started Galveston Diet and I went through the weight gain associated with perimenopause and menopause, I weighed less than I do right now. So I was really thin. Like my BMI was and I had no muscle because that was my goal, was to have this certain weight on the scale. And then I shot past that with my visceral fat, right? And I was maybe 127 pounds. And I was like, oh, this is horrible. And so, everything was to get back to that number on the scale. And now at 55, I'm probably 2 pounds over my heaviest, but it's all muscle. And I'm so proud. I'm like, look, Jen, she works with me in the office. I've gained a pound of muscle and we're celebrating because it's really hard at our age to build the muscle.
Okay, so I think we've covered food. Is there anything else on the food front that you feel like we
So prioritizing protein, plants, fiber. Those are really top things. Vitamin D. So I don't recommend blanket supplements often. I am a doctor who sells supplements, so full disclosure, but and fiber is one of our products, but I'm always preaching, get your fiber from food. This is just a helper. This is not replacing a healthy diet. 80% of my patients, and probably across the board of women in menopause, are vitamin D deficient. Many reasons for that. We're avoiding the sun for good reason.
Because of the
protect
wrinkles?
our skin from sun damage, and skin cancer.
I think a lot of women do it for wrinkles.
Well, that too. I was certainly, yeah. And that's why my face looks so good, but my neck does not.
Oh, interesting. Because you protect your face.
I was so good about protecting my face, but not the rest of my body, and I'm paying the price now. Then also our gut is changing. So our absorption of vitamin D gets less, and our ability to convert the cholesterol to vitamin D in the skin is decreasing with age as well. So I'm really telling patients, vitamin D supplements are really for maintenance, but sometimes I have to put them on prescription high doses to get them up to a maintenance level.
Wow, we're that low on vitamin D.
So I'm telling everyone on the internet, go get your vitamin D checked. When you're having routine labs, have them send a vitamin D, because it's such a critical enzyme in so many, it's a hormone actually, and it's involved in so many processes in our body. So a lot of women, it'll exacerbate, so your menopause symptoms are terrible, but you don't have enough vitamin D. So, everything's worse. It kind of compounds everything. And then we get the vitamin D's normal, and suddenly they're sleeping again, or their hot flushes are better, and they're just from correcting a vitamin D deficiency.
God, and then thinking about how this becomes a cycle. So let's say, for instance, you're going into menopause, you're feeling depressed, you don't feel great. The last thing you do is go outside in the sun. You almost retreat, right? And you go more into your cocoon. So then thinking how important the vitamin D is to help with your hormones and then potentially the depression is fascinating. So the idea that obviously the supplements is great. And then going out in the sun as much as humanly possible. Obviously you don't want to burn and stuff like that, but what do you recommend?
So I tell my patients, there's some really great information out there about grounding. If you're gonna go out in the sun, also remember there's multiple things you can do out there. So take your shoes off and walk in the grass. There are great studies showing how healthy that is for our mental health, and how, you're getting healthy sun exposure up to a certain point, but you're also getting your mental health better as well. So, and exercise is such a huge part, and we are tending to do it wrong. So forever, our generations moved to be thin, but we were never taught to move to be strong. Now, I think the millennials are better about that now, but I did not seriously lift a weight until I was in my 50s.
Wow.
And I was doing step aerobics, maybe with a 1 pound weight or something, or putting a little 1 pound weight on my wrist. But that is not enough to keep you from falling and breaking a hip at 80.
Yeah.
And so really getting serious about muscle training, and that you have to push those muscles to be strong. So one of my hacks is the weighted vest. So I fell in love with the weighted vest. I read some studies. I was looking at, I was trying to develop, so many of my patients were coming in with osteopenia and osteoporosis. I'm like, I need an osteoporosis prevention pack. What would be in my kit that I would hand to a patient? Of course, hormone therapy is huge. Vitamin D, or not calcium supplements, but increasing calcium in her diet naturally. There is a great supplement called Fortibone that was studied in patients with osteoporosis and osteopenia. It's a small study, but it's not harmful. And they actually saw improvement in bone density with this one bioactive specific collagen. So, and then the weighted vest. So there were these studies done on women who were in long-term care facilities with osteopenia and osteoporosis, of them wearing weighted vests. They were also doing creatine. That's another great supplement that can be helpful for prevention and treatment of osteoporosis.
How much creatine should we be taking?
But most of the studies were done with about 5 grams per day, though Dr. Lyon, I just saw her talking about that's enough for maintenance of muscle mass, but for the brain, she thinks you can go up to 10. So, but it's a slippery slope, because some people are having bloating and GI, everything comes at a price. And so I usually start my patients at 5 grams per day, and then we kind of titrate up and see how they do with their gut.
You mentioned calcium. What foods can we take naturally that have a high in calcium?
So dairy, if you can tolerate it. So my genetics, no problem. I can drink milk. I don't like it though, but I do eat yogurt. So I try to get, my calcium from there. But again, a lot of fruits and vegetables actually have really high amounts of calcium. So broccoli, magnesium again. So, and just learning how to track it and figuring out, what food groups you need to hit to get the calcium in.
What about cheese and things like, cheese, I was going to say.
Cheese. So, pretty much I'm getting my, I try to do fermented cheeses again for the probiotics. So your feta, I'm sprinkling it on salads. Cheese for us is like a side. It's like an accoutrement or something. And sometimes when I'm like, I like cheese with a sliced apples. I'll do a little cheddar. You know, I just love that salty sweet combination. So those are little ways to help get extra calcium in your diet.
And you said feta cheese is fermented. So is it what, like soft cheeses?
Soft cheeses tend to have natural probiotics in them.
It's the soft cheeses that bother my gut.
So people who are lactose intolerant, you can usually do Parmesan.
Yeah.
Because there's very low lactose.
Yeah. Is it still got high calcium?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So the harder the cheese, it doesn't necessarily mean that it means lower calcium.
No.
Got it.
It just has very little probiotics in them.
Understood. Okay. I love geeking out on this. Okay, so you were saying exercise. So should we stop running and start lifting weights?
I think we're doing probably overall focusing on too much cardio because that's beneficial. We don't need as much as we think, especially women. Women need less cardio than men for cardiovascular health. That study just came out. And so take that time and flip it to muscle training.
Right. Why is it less for women?
We don't know. But finally someone looked at it and they actually need less cardio for the same benefits for cardiovascular protection than men do.
Maybe it makes sense because women typically carry more fat. You don't want as low body fat as a man. Typically, correct?
Yeah. We just naturally carry more.
Yeah. Okay, so we went over nutrition with diet and then exercise. And let's talk about sleep because you've mentioned that a couple of times of how that is like the thing that you specifically make sure.
So sleep becomes horribly disrupted for most women through the menopause transition. Probably 80 to 90% have.
Wow.
So part of it is hot flashes for sure. So if you're having hot flashes that are waking you up at night, and that was happening to me as well, you know, that's usually fixable with pharmacology. Gold standard is going to be your hormone replacement therapy, but there are other medications that can be helpful if you don't want HRT or you're not a candidate. So, and you can talk to your doctor about that.
Right.
However, sleep is still really disrupted in menopause, and we're not sure if it's body composition changes or, you know, how we process alcohol tends to really change in menopause. So like so many women are telling me, more than I'm one of them, you know, I used to be able to have a glass or two of wine and my sleep was never disrupted. Yeah. That is gone. Those days are gone for me. One glass, I can usually, if I do it early, I'll be okay. But two, if I choose to drink, I am choosing not to sleep. And that is something I have to live with. And most of my patients and most of my followers, it's the same thing. Certainly not all, but they are really, and like so many women have reached out and said, I've just given it up completely. You know, it just isn't worth it anymore. I cannot sleep.
And so why are we less tolerant to alcohol?
We're not sure. Again, body composition changes could be part of it, but you know, our brains completely rewire through the menopause transition. And one of the hits is probably how our brains are processing alcohol.
Wow. So I love the idea though of, okay, this is just where I am. This is where my body is. I just know that if I want to drink alcohol, I'm going to lack sleep. Yeah. And so at least predicting, okay, you don't want a speaking gig the next day.
Right.
Like having, just setting your life up so you can still enjoy it if you want to and you choose to, but knowing that what the knock-on effects are and that it doesn't make you weak or decrepit, like the words that we say to ourselves.
It actually makes you more powerful because now you're choosing to do things that are good for your body instead of things that you now know beyond the shadow of a doubt, at least in my house, that are not going to give me my best life.
Yeah, because a lot of us, we will put ourselves down like, I'm getting so old, I can't even handle alcohol.
Here's my take on it. I am almost 56 and I am living my absolute best life. I have never been more successful financially, academically, you know. I have never been more respected. I have never helped so many women. And like, I loved my job. I love delivering babies. I wish they came between 8 and 5 every day because I'd probably still be an obstetrician. But, you know, I walked away from that so I could focus on me and focus on this time of our lives. And it has absolutely been the best. And I want every woman to feel the way. My relationship's never been better. My marriage, you know, with my children have never been better. You know, every aspect of my life is better. And I just want that for everyone. This does not have to be the worst time of your life, which is happening for so many of us. And they're not being given the tools or the support to be able to get through this.
Talk to me about the impact of stress and what are the things, as we talk about sleep and nutrition and exercise and things, stress is such a massive thing that I used to dismiss so much. What can we do immediately to de-escalate our stress?
It depends on the person. So what works for me may not work for you. And I always thought, like meditation and journaling and all of that was woo-woo. And, you know, I'm too busy for that. I don't have the bandwidth for that. And it was literally almost losing my marriage and my relationship with my children that, you know, made me say, okay, I've got to do something different, and really got into meditation, guided meditation with my therapist, and then learning about journaling and being gratitude. And it wasn't overnight, but like I can look back at Mary Claire back then and really see the progression that I've made. And so what worked for me was that. For you, it might be prayer. For someone else, it may be going for coffee with a girlfriend. You know, finding that time to turn off the world and focus on you and your needs and your wants really, really, really lowers, you know, grounding helps, but it's experimenting with what's going to work for you, and what works for you now may not work in 10 years. And so, because we change and that's okay. And so, but really just finding that time to prioritize yourself, I think is the best stress reliever.
I love that. How did you navigate all of that work with your family? Were you very open about it? Because I'm just almost picturing the person at home right now where they're like, I'm feeling like it. I'd love to feel better like you, for this to be the best years of my life, not like the worst. But you're having a bit of stress with the husband or the spouse and the kids. How were you able to navigate the self-care, showing up for yourself when you have kids and a husband?
I kind of had to force it. You know, I kind of had to just be, you know, the kids are banging through the bedroom in the morning and I'm sitting in the bed with my meditation app, you know, and they saw me doing it. And it a lot of it, we can all look behind. And so my oldest, who's now 23 and in medical school and really radicalized for menopause because I'm her mother, was like, Mom, I just feel like I need to apologize because here I was a teenager and you were going through perimenopause and I didn't, you know, it was a lot of headbutting. I didn't have that fun, easy teenage experience with the first one. The second one was a different kid and it was better for her. And I was also more evolved in my own stress reduction. But, you know, just having her kind of come back around and our relationship has never been better. You know, it really was rough from like 14 to the end of college. And then when she got serious about medical school and I'd already done it, that really seemed to kind of open her mind and maybe she's not the worst thing in the world.
You felt vindicated as well. Yeah. Like now she gets it.
Yeah. So
the reason why I ask is as I'm approaching that age, me and my husband are being very open and honest about the fact that I'm going to be going through a transition. We've been together for 23 years. So, hey, babe, I'm not that same 20-year-old or the 30-year-old who was hustling and grinding and questing. It's like, I need more time for self-care. I have to work less, like all of these things. And then you met him, but I was like, babe, you gotta read her book, because to me, if he understands what's happening to me by reading your book, now he can be a facilitator in the journey with me versus the opposition. And I think when you're on a path, especially when it comes to being on a path with a partner, you can move away from them or you can move towards them. And so as I go through understanding myself what is happening, for my husband and spouse to also understand, I think is tremendously powerful.
The best patient visits I have are when their loved ones come because they really are there just to understand and to help validate her because she's been dismissed. Some of my patients have seen 6, 7, 8 doctors for, you know, because each symptom that they had was silo. They went to the cardiologist for the palpitations and the psychiatrist for her depression. And, and so finally they see something. Most of my patients fly in to see me or drive in from very far. You know, they can't find anyone in their community. That's getting better. But it's such an honor. And when their partner comes and he's really just there to support her and understand so he can be a better person through this, I mean, it's everything. So I can't be everyone's doctor, but actually having people who love, and there's a part in the book, you know, anyone who loves a woman who's going through menopause or a person who's going through menopause, this book is for you too, so that you can understand better what she's going through and be a better support system for her.
Because I really do just go, okay, what's the real world look like on an average Wednesday when a woman's going through menopause and she's married and she's got her kids, and like, how do we navigate a regular day? And so even thinking, going back to the sleep thing that you were saying, especially because you share a bed with your partner, now your sleep patterns are changing. And so being able to, your partner to understand your sleep patterns will be super helpful. But what other things can we do during our sleep that can help us actually sleep? So you mentioned like that, don't drink alcohol, of course.
Right.
What other things can we do?
If you talk to the sleep medicine specialist, which I have in detail, you know, we can't say enough about sleep hygiene. So we need a much cooler room than we probably have had. And so somewhere in the high 60s to low 70s is really the sweet spot. Our internal body temperature, even if you're not having hot flashes, tends to reset. I was always freezing my whole life, and now I'm always hot.
Yeah, me too.
And so, I have to really cool the room down. Now my husband's piling the covers on, but he knows I won't sleep unless the room is cool enough, where I'm really just sleeping with a sheet and a very light blanket. He's got the comforter on his side because he calls it, I'm freezing him out. But that's just kind of what we have to do. We changed our mattress, to one that has a cooling thing in it for me. We, also the blue light, the turning off, the electronics and which I'm not that great about, but those are all things that actually have been shown to be really helpful for sleep hygiene, setting the right environment for your sleep, turning off notifications on your phone, all that stuff, because it is just that much harder. Not drinking too much water. If you have overactive bladder, having to get up 2 to 3 times a night to pee can be an issue. So limiting your fluid intake at night, or getting on medication to decrease the, getting on vaginal estrogen or whatever you need to do to decrease the amount of times you have to get up to sleep. So magnesium for some patients can be really helpful.
Before bed?
So I recommend a magnesium L-threonate, which crosses the blood-brain barrier. Better than most of the there's other mags. Some just stay in the gut and induce diarrhea, milk of magnesia. That's what it is, to help move the bowel along. Others go into the bloodstream really well, but don't get into the brain as well. But I really like the studies. Mag-L-threonate was studied in SSRI-resistant depression. It really has positive effects on the brain, probably more than others. So that's the one I tend to recommend if they're struggling with sleep. Melatonin should be really used in small amounts for short periods of time. So if you're doing time zone changes or whatever, not something, that you should be taking every night. But magnesium you can safely take every night. It really shouldn't disrupt things. And then, of course, hormone therapy.
Yeah. So actually, you've mentioned hormone therapy.
So progesterone.
Okay.
So progestin, I just went to a conference in Chicago where there were a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist talking about menopause and the mental effects, especially with sleep. And, talking about serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine and how those become deranged through the menopause transition and how that affects mental health, cognition, and sleep. So they talked about how powerful progesterone is with the GABA receptors. So I'm having my patients take their progesterone at night before they go to bed. I take mine at night before I go to bed, and that can be extremely helpful for sleep, especially for nighttime anxiety and racing thoughts. Even if you wake up, you tend to go to bed back to sleep sooner with
interesting.
the progesterone.
And that is a prescription? Or
That is a prescription.
Got
Yeah.
it. Okay. And didn't you say, though, that Medicare doesn't cover a menopause visit?
No. So Medicare doesn't cover woman exam. It does breast and cancer screening only. So there's no Medicare code in the Medicare nomenclature. So it's usually a problem visit. And you really should not make your woman exam your menopause visit. That should be a separate, because you have more time. And you should go in, I have lists in the book of questions to ask your doctor, things to prepare, what time of day to make your appointment so that you have, what kind of appointment, what labs to ask for. That's all in the book so that you can be as prepared as possible. But even that's not a guarantee, that you're going to get a menopause-informed provider. So menopause.org is it used to be called North American Menopause Society. It's the Menopause Society now. They rebranded. But they have a list of, which I'm one, of certified providers on their website. And if you still can't find anyone locally, there's some great telemedicine providers out there who were built by female entrepreneurs who saw a need, saw a gap, knew that we're a generation of getting enough providers trained. And let me say this. Why should women's health all be dumped in the lap of the poor, busy OB-GYN? Everyone in medical school should learn about the gender differences of disease. Why is menopause siloed to just OB-GYN? This should be something taught to any person who's going to touch a clinician who's going to touch a female. These are important things that you need to know, how it affects kidney disease, how it affects heart disease, how it affects our bones, how it affects our brains. This should not be just an OB-GYN thing. This should be everyone should be learning about this.
That's so true. It never dawned on me, even during this discussion. You're 100% right. Honestly, that's why I freaking love your book. You break everything down. You have this condition, this is what you can do about it. So girl, I could sit here with you for hours.
I'll have to come back.
Please do. This interview has been fantastic. Where can people find you and your amazing book?
So we are all over social media, Dr. Mary Claire, and then our website is The Pause Life.
If you want to learn the top foods that us women need to eat to boost our energy, lose the weight, and look younger and feel better, then click here right now.
This is so important. Why is nobody talking about this?
The glucose goddess is in the house and destroys and debunks every single thing we thought was true.